Yale Oriental Series, Researchers, Volume 5, Part 3, A Hebrew Deluge Story in Cuneiform by Albert T. Clay. Who was Albert T. Clay? Albert Tobias Clay, December 4, 1866 to September 14, 1925, was an American professor, historian and Semitic linguist. Semitic people or Semites is an obsolete term for an ethnic, cultural or racial group associated with people of the Middle East, including Arabs, Jews, Akkadians and Phoenicians. The terminology is now largely unused outside the grouping. He was professor of Assyriology as well as a linguist. And Assyriology is known as Cuneiform studies of ancient Near East studies, the archaeological, anthropological, historical and linguistic study of the cultures that use cuneiform writing. The field covers pre-dynastic Mesopotamia, Syria, etc. And he was also a professor of Babylonian literature at Yale University. Akkadian literature is the ancient literature written in the Akkadian language in Mesopotamia during the period spanning the Middle Bronze Age to the Iron Age. And he served as a founding curator of the Yale Babylonian collection, an independent branch of the Yale University Library, housed on the Yale University campus and Sterling Memorial Library at New Haven, Connecticut, United States. So he had a range of qualifications. Background: Albert Tobias Clay was born in Hanover, New York County, Pennsylvania. He graduated from Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania during 1889 and from the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Gettysburg in 1892. He was subsequently ordained into the Lutheran ministry. This is his career. Clay went on to become a teaching fellow in the Syrian. What's a teaching fellow? An individual at a higher education institution, including the universities, whose role involves teaching and potentially pedagogic research. The work done by teaching fellows can vary enormously from institution to institution. So he was a teaching fellow in Assyrian and instructor in the Hebrew language at the University of Pennsylvania in 1895 to 99. He returned as lecturer in Semitic archaeology after being an instructor in Old Testament theology at the Chicago Lutheran Seminary. He was assistant professor of Semitic philology and archaeology 1903 to 09 and full professor 1 year, and so forth. And he had a huge range of books we found online, at least 30 or more. Well, let's say 20 to 30. Here's his personal life, his references, note, external links. Yale Oriental Series, Researchers, Volume 5, Part 3. A Hebrew Deluge Story in Cuneiform and Other Epic Fragments in the Pierpont Morgan Library by Albert T. Clay. Forward. The title of this book tells its own story, naming that an ancient Hebrew flood tradition was written in cuneiform. This story of the deluge or flood found its way into Babylonia, where it was made to largely conform to the Akkadian dialect, which fully betrays its origins. It came from the same source from where the Hebrew traditions came, mainly from the people who lived in Ur, Mesopotamia and Syria, called the Amorites. As was the case in pre-Mosaic days, and to a large extent in early Israel, when henotheism prevailed. What is henotheism? We can look that up. Henotheism. Never heard of that one. Belief in the supremacy of one God without denying the existence of others. Primitive religion in which each of the several divinities is regarded as independent and is worshipped without reference to the rest. Belief in or worship of one deity without denying the existence of other deities. Henotheism is a worship of a single supreme God that does not deny the existence or possible existence of other deities that may not be worshipped. Friedrich Schelling, 1775 to 1854, coined the word, and Frederick Welcher, 1784 to 1868, used it to depict primitive monotheism among ancient Greeks. Henotheism, from the Greek theos or one God, refers to religious belief systems that accept the existence of many gods, such as polytheism, but worship one deity as supreme. Such belief systems have been found throughout history and across the world's culture. So would the Christian religion be that like that? In regards to Jesus, God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit? Okay, there's some dictionary meanings. Britannica, which is over 250 years old, so I guess you could trust that. Henotheism is the worship of one God while acknowledging the existence of others. And so forth. Okay. The story of the flood found its way into Babylonia, where it was made to largely conform to the Akkadian dialect, which fully betrays its origins. It came from the same source from where the Hebrew traditions came from, mainly from the people who lived in Amuru, Mesopotamia and Syria, called the Amorites, as was the case in pre-Mosaic days, and to a large extent in early Israel, when henotheism prevailed. God is the foremost deity. We learn from this tradition, and also from its redaction written centuries later, that a long famine preceded the deluge, or the flood, which is not referred to in the Old Testament, that the famine had been sent because men had multiplied, and also because of their clamour, reminding us of the causes given for the deluge in the Old Testament. Clamour probably meaning their following their own ways, doing their own thing, turning their back on God and doing ungodly, wicked sins. So that's why God caused this flood to wipe them out. The great importance of this inscription, which was copied about the time of Abraham from an older tablet, together with other facts here presented within this book, is that it will require that the prevailing view be abandoned that the Hebrew traditions were borrowed from Babylonia. This involves many scholarly works written in recent decades upon the early history of Israel. It has been generally held that these stories are of Babylonian origin, that Canaan was a domain of Babylonian culture in the time of Moses, and that Israel had assimilated this foreign culture as well as its religion, feathers and all. Not only is the Israelite cult held to be dependent upon the Babylonian, but also many of the chief characters are said to have descended from Babylonian mythology. In Germany, where these views developed, some scholars have gone to great extremes. Only a change of names had taken place, and Marduk or Bel was transformed into Christ. In America, a more moderate position has generally been accepted, in which the extreme views were toned down and the Pan-Babylonian theory made more palatable. Nevertheless, it is generally held that these traditions had been brought from Babylonia in the time of Abraham, or in the Amarna period, or at the time of the exile, and that many of the characters had their origin in myth. The writer's thesis in brief is that the Arabian origin of the Semites living in ancient Syria and Babylonia, including the Hebrews, is baseless, but that the antiquity of the Amorite civilization is very great, and also the assertion that the culture and religion of Israel were borrowed from Babylonia is without any foundation, for they were indigenous, and that the Semites who migrated to Babylonia with their culture were mainly from Amuru. In the judgment of the writer, The material presented in this little monograph, as well as in his recently published Empire of the Amorites, will require a very extensive readjustment of many views bearing upon the subject, as well as the abandonment of many others. Moreover, it also has bearings of a far-reaching character on many other Old Testament problems. Amuru, called the land of the Amorites, it might be added, is a geographical term which was used in ancient times for the great stretch of territory between Babylonia and the Mediterranean. By reason of its products and its position, this land had been attractive to other peoples ever since. One strove to obtain what the other possessed, resulting in almost innumerable invasions and conflicts taking place in this land. Within the historical period, we know that the Babylonians, Egyptians, Hittites, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Turks, and other peoples controlled this territory. It should be added that this country in turn also prevailed at times over other lands, notably Babylonia and Egypt. In these pages of this book, we have evidence that one of its rulers conquered Babylonia as early as 4000 BC. This country has always represented ethnologically a great mixture. Linguistically, as far as is known, a Semitic language has always prevailed in this great stretch of territory. The Amorite or Hebrew language, being the oldest of which we have knowledge, was followed by the Aramaic. Well, we're not too sure if that Hebrew actually is the older language. Maybe it is in the Breetah or the book of Genesis, where it talks about Abraham and the A-wer, or the Hebrews, and Abraham being in the Ur of Chaldea, born there, and he was promised by God this land of abundance, milk and honey, and he made this journey, but he ended up in Haran because his father's brother died. Terah, he died there. Haran was named after his father, right? Or it's either his father or his uncle. Excavations at one or two well-selected sites this country has always represented ethnologically a great mixture. Linguistically, as far as is known, a Semitic language has always prevailed in this great stretch of territory. The Amorite or Hebrew language, being the oldest of which we have knowledge, was followed by the Aramaic and later by the Arabic, which now prevails. To what extent the Akkadian dialect was used in certain parts and what script was employed in the early period as yet undetermined. Excavations at one or two well-selected sites will throw light on this and many other questions, and furnish us with the material whereby we will be able to reconstruct many chapters of its early history. Okay. And he gives credit to other people. Contents page. An ancient Hebrew deluge story. This fragment of a large tablet was published in text transliteration and translation nearly 25 years ago, before it had come to the possession of the Pierpont Morgan Library collection of Babylonian inscriptions. In the meantime, many other translations had appeared. Moreover, owing to the form of which the tablet had been presented, due to its not having been thoroughly cleaned, its importance has only been slightly appreciated. While it was understood that it had the same general application as legend preserved in the British Museum, known as the Ea and Atrahasis legend, and belonged to a later period, the latter, owing to its fragmentary condition, could not be said to refer to the deluge or the flood. Moreover, while it was apparent that the present text did refer to the deluge or flood, it was considered even by one who examined the tablet that it contained little more than a few phrases and words without any coherent connection. Further study, however, as will be seen from what follows, reveals the fact that this is a mistake, that it is a part of an old version of what should properly be called the Atrahasis epic, which is a very ancient Hebrew or Amorite deluge story or flood story, and that the so-called Ea and Atrahasis legend of the Assyrian period, which has also been translated by a number of scholars, is a late redaction of it. The later version or redaction was put into a magical setting for incantation purposes. In the appendix will be found the transliteration and translation of all the versions of this deluge story or stories, both Cuneiform and Greek. The ancient dated text is designated as A and the late redaction as B. A small fragment in the British Museum ostensibly from a version of the Atrahasis epic, for it mentions the hero's name, which is also written in the late period. Furnishes us with a conversation between the god Ea and Atrahasis concerning the construction of the ship, or the ark, and with what it should be loaded. This is designated in the Appendix C. The hero of the other and well-known Deluge story, which in the late period has been woven into the Gilgamesh epic, is Atrahasis. But his title, which is better known in connection with the story, is Napishtim, or Uta Napishtim. This is designated as E. Besides these versions or fragments of versions, there is also known a little fragment of 13 partially preserved lines written probably in the Kassite period, about 1400 BC, in which neither the name of a god nor that of the hero is preserved. This is designated as F. The Deluge story handed down by Berosus, in which the hero is Xisuthros, which name represents a transportation of the elements of Atrahasis, for example, Hasis Atra, is still another version of the epic. This is designated as G. The only dated version written in cuneiform is one in the Pierpoint Morgan collection. It was copied from a still earlier inscription by a junior scribe named Azag-aya on the 28th day of Shebet in the 11th year of Ami Zaduga, 1966 BC, which date is about 1300 years earlier than the time of the library of Ashurbanipal, 668 to 626 BC, to which the late redaction of it, now in the British Museum, belonged. The original from which the scribe copied had already been injured in the 12th line, which is indicated by the word hebus, broken. How much earlier the previous text was written cannot be surmised or determined, but there are reasons for believing it is a very ancient legend, probably written 2,000 years earlier. Unfortunately, the tablet has been injured since it was first published 25 years ago. Okay, when they probably translated it and then put those findings into print. Several small pieces have been lost from the surface of it. In the copy of the inscription given in the appendix, these parts are based upon the original copy made 25 years ago and are indicated by small ink dots easily recognized. And here's a selection from the early version lines 1 to 19. Words are all found in the first 19 lines of the text. Naturally, the words currently used in Babylonia as well as in Amuru are not discussed. It is to be noted that the hero Atrahasis bears an Amorite name. This name, and it is according to the footnotes here, this name is generally considered to be two words meaning exceedingly wise, the very wise one. While the Babylonian used it as synonymous with those words, it was nevertheless a personal name, and this does not seem to have been its original meaning. Names compound with Atar and Atar, also written Atra, Atram, with and without the determination, are numerous among West Semitic names. Compare Atar, BD, etc., etc. The Babylonians, in making use of these West Semitic legends, having their own word Atru, meaning surplus, abundant, made an etymological play upon the name, as was done so frequently in the Old Testament, interpreting it in their own legends as being synonymous with very wise, as is done in the Etana and Adapu epics. It will be noticed that in the Adapa fragment discussed, the word At-ra-ha-si-sa is not written grammatically as two words in the sentence, but is looked upon as a name synonymous with the idea clever one. The same is true in the Etana legend, where At-ha-si-sa is in apposition with Ad-mu-si-ru, which is the nominative, is in the nominative case. The fact that the determinative for man is placed before it, especially in this early period, makes it impossible to regard it here as being an epithet for a hero bearing another name. These facts and others which follow, especially those in connection with the name Elu, God, for the chief deity name in this legend, prove conclusively that this was originally a Hebrew, or A-wer, A-W-E-R, people who made a crossing, who crossed over, who made a journey, i.e. Abraham to the land of Canaan. This was originally a Hebrew or Amorite deluge story or flood story. If this is an Amorite legend, we should expect to find also in the work of the late redactor or glossarist Amorite words which had not been adopted by the Semitic Babylonians, and in this we are not disappointed. A comparison of the two texts shows how the redactor inserted glosses or parallel phrases in connection with the words here, etc. And then it goes into a deeper explanation of all these words. The story get back here. The legend had been Akkadianized before the early text was written in 1966 BC. In a long period which preceded, it had suffered many changes when redactors had made the original Amorite text conform to the dialect in current use in Babylonia. Fortunately, as has been seen, all the words peculiar to the West had not been eliminated, and this process was seen to go on in the writing of personal names of those coming fresh from the West in the Hammurabi period. For example, names like Ur, Ishmaelite, etc. had become Akkadianized, but on the arrival from the West of others bearing those names, it's found that they were written Ur, Ishmaelite, etc. Even the position of the verbs in the sentence has suffered changes, for while they are frequently found at the beginning, as in Hebrew, they are also found placed at the end or indifferently in the sentence, as is the case in Akkadian. The story of the Deluge, or the flood, is contained in the Gilgamesh epic. Certain scholars maintain embraces elements of more than one tradition. They say Napishtim is the hero of the epic, yet it nevertheless also refers to Atrahasis. This has prompted some scholars to identify him with Napishtim, while others consider that, as has already been noted, in this late story the name Atrahasis is used as synonym for a very wise man, as in the case in several of the epics. However, it seems to the writer that the situation is entirely misunderstood. As stated above, footnote 16, Atrahasis is a personal name. The passage the wise one, Atrahasis, could hardly be translated the wise one, the very wise, and it doubtless shows also where the later etymologists got their idea for their play upon the name. In all the versions except the Sumerian, the hero's name is Atrahasis. After the flood, he was given a title. Although not fully understood, it is or Uta Napishtim, Rukim, Rugam, also Ina Rugi, Uruki, which in the Sumerian paraphrase is written Zi'u Suru. This title has been variously translated: he who lengthened the days of life, he who made life long of days, etc. Certainly this is not a personal name, which fact the Gilgamesh story fully recognizes. When Ea, in the Gilgamesh story E196, tells the gods how the hero learned that the flood would occur, he does not say, I made Napishtim see a dream, for at that time he had not been thus designated. But Ea says, I made Atrahasis see a dream. This is one of the many gods, right? The pantheon of gods. one of the gods in the pantheon. That was his name. He had not yet earned the title. In short, this is no confusion of names, as some have inferred, but an exact statement, and the use of the title instead of the name in the Sumerian paraphrase is a proof that it is borrowed from the Semitic legend. This writer has previously maintained, simply on a basis of the personal names found in the Gilgamesh epic story, that it is largely from a Hebrew or Amorite original. And then he says, let us inquire whether a study of the language used in its composition will betray its original source. The first Hebrew word to be noted in the Gilgamesh epic story is Nasiriyah. Secret E9. This word, as far as known to the writer, was not in current use in Akkadian, but the Hebrew word meaning hidden thing from this root is known in the Old Testament. See Isaiah 48:6. The word for part of the boat, called la'an, E60, which was the hull or bottom, is Hebrew from the root lun, or lun, to lodge, doubtless because there is where the people lodged. That's where the people lodged. The word used for the roof of the boat, namely see E60, is Amorite. See note in appendix. And he goes deep into all of these words' meaning of the words. There are other Hebrew words discussed in the notes beneath the translations, some of which are tentatively offered, while others are reasonably certain. There are also glosses. Doubtless, further study will reveal more which were really, if ever, used in Akkadian. If the Napishtim story was originally written in Sumerian, or even in Akkadian, certainly it becomes necessary to explain how these foreign Hebrew words, even in this late version of the Assyrian period, came to be used in the epic. And it was the writer's opinion that no other conclusion could be arrived at but that this Deluge story, or flood story, which probably embraces some elements indigenous to Babylonia, was mainly an Amorite legend which the Semites from Amuru brought with them from the west. Since we know that other peoples of the early period had deluge or flood stories, it would be precarious to say that the Sumerians and the Babylonians did not have their own, especially as this land must have suffered even more than others, and because this legend refers to Shuri-Papak, the king of Shuri-Papak, right, or that city, Shuri-Papak. But with this exception, there is nothing in the Gilgamesh epic story that can be said to be distinctively Babylonian. Even the word translated reed, hut, is very probably an archaic West Semitic word. And on the other hand, there are, as we have seen, a number of Hebrew words used in the epic which were not current in Babylonia, which together with other facts shows that the story is mainly Amorite. Moreover, it is not at all improbable that reference to the dolmen in the Sumerian version, if that name is to be identified with the region of the Persian Gulf, is also a part of the local colouring of the legend received. Since it has been shown that the Sumerian story, whose hero was named Zeusuru, is connected with the Napishtim story, and that it was probably written at a time when Sumerian as a spoken language had survived in a more or less corrupt style, sometime between 2300 and 1300 BC, it seems, in light of the above, until other evidence is forthcoming, the only conclusion at which we can arrive is that it must be regarded as a short paraphrase of the Amorite story, which may include some features of a Sumerian tradition. It has even taken over the Akkadian word Puru, which, as we have seen, had displaced the Amorite Buru. The fact that Sumerian was used for official communications, for legal documents, as well as for literature in general in certain Babylonian cities in the latter half of the 3rd millennium BC, makes it possible to understand why such very ancient stories which had been brought into Babylonia from Amuru should also be found in written Sumerian. Nearly every subscription from Nippur of this period is written in Sumerian. It was the legal and liturgical language. In some of the neighbouring cities it was not so. For example, Sippara, which probably became the ancient version of the Amorite Atrahasis epic. This city was preeminently Semitic. It has been claimed that the little Semitic fragment containing 13 partially preserved lines, now in the Museum of the University of Pennsylvania, USA, was originally written in Sumerian, and that it was brought to Canaan at the time Abraham left his home on the Euphrates and moved westward. But the few lines of this supposed Sumerian story are full of Hebrew words, which were not in current use in Akkadian. But yeah, that would be right. If he, with the Hebrews, the A-wer, him being a Chaldean, is born in Ur Chaldea, made this journey, crossed over to this other land, eventually into Canaan, right? Yeah, sure. It must be admitted that it seems strange that the Akkadian translator of this supposed Sumerian story should have used so many Hebrew words which were not in current use in Babylonia, in making the translation of these few lines into Akkadian. And this writer fully appreciated the fact that at any time cuneiform inscriptions may be found in Babylonia, which will contain examples of these Hebrew words, other than those already known, because of the flow of Western Semites in nearly all periods into this land. Nevertheless, it will be possible to continue to maintain that they were not in current use in the Akkadian dialect. Nearly all scholars who have published discussions of the biblical deluge or flood traditions in recent years, it's prior to this book being written, had conceded that they are of Babylonian origin. This view can be said to have been very generally accepted by scholars. Some hold that these stories were brought from Babylonia to Canaan by Abraham. Others say that they were transmitted to the west in the Maria or Amana period, but the great majority of scholars hold that knowledge of them was obtained in Babylonian at the time of the exile. Two arguments are generally advanced for this position. The one is the Great Age of Babylonian civilization, which involved the idea that civilization in the West had only developed a little before 2000 BC by Arabs from Arabia, and the other argument is based on the frequency of inundations in Babylonia, which gave rise to the so-called nature myths. In 1909, the present writer endeavoured to show that the Babylonian origin of the biblical deluge or flood stories was without any foundation, but that they were indigenous to the West, and that on the other hand the Babylonian story of the deluge, as preserved in the Gilgamesh epic, contained West Semitic elements, showing that no other conclusion could be arrived at but that extensive influences had been felt from Amuru. Clay, Amuru, the home of the northern Semites, footnote at the bottom. These discoveries show that there is no need to find the origin of the biblical stories of Babylonia because of the theory that the West in the early period did not have an indigenous literature and did not have a civilization. The present version and other data presented in the discussion in another chapter forever disprove this hypothesis and requires its abandonment. Moreover, it is necessary that a general readjustment be made of views advanced by Pan-Babylonians and Pan-Egypto-Babylonians, whose positions have been based upon the supposed Arabic origin of the Semites in Amuru and upon the supposedly late rise and development of civilization in that land. The discoveries made since 1909, when the present writer first contested this position, clearly shows that we have reasons for believing that the civilization of the Western Semites synchronizes with the earliest that has been found in Babylonia and Egypt. More recently, prior to this being written and published probably, the writer had shown that the theory must be abandoned that the so-called Egypto-Babylonian culture brought forth the earliest civilization in the 1,000 years between 4000 and 3000 BC, while all the rest of the world continued to live in Stone Age barbarism or savagery. For there is every reason to believe that in Amuru, with its natural agriculture districts over widespread areas, such as those about Hit, Aleppo, Haran, etc., with its wonderfully wooden districts, as in the Lebanon region, with its mines and natural products, which in ancient times, as at present, have been so attractive for other peoples, and also in Elam with its valleys so well adapted, etc., etc. There is another very important fact which the old version has revealed, and that is the occurrence of Elu, or Ilu, God, in the title of the series, as well as in the text for the foremost deity's name. This title was originally incorrectly read Enuma Salu A-wer, and since translated many times when a man lay down to sleep. But Ilu is perfectly clear on the tablet in the legend's context and in the colophon. Ilu, God, here takes the place of An or An in the early Semitic and Sumerian texts, and of Anu of later texts. The ideogram An in the early period in nearly all such connections has been generally read Anu or Ana. It is well known that the God whose name was written with the sign An, God, was the highest of the gods who had created mankind, and who was worshipped as the supreme ruler of the universe. In the text here published, we learn that the Western Semites in this early period called the Godhead Ilu, or El, God, the same as in the Old Testament, and there can be little doubt but that in the early period the Akkadians did the same. It is not impossible that the Sumerians, before they came to Babylonia, called their foremost deity Ana or Anna, but there is no proof of this. To the writer it seems more probable that after they had conquered the land and created or furnished the people with the Cuneiform syllabary, they wrote An, which in their language meant heaven, as well as Dingur, God, for the name of the most high God of the Semites, namely Ilu. Certainly in the early syllabaries, An represented Ilu. In time, An became Semitized into Anu, in the same way that Enlil, Lord of the Storm, became Enlil, Lord of the Storm, became Enlil. It is also not improbable that the West Semitic Anu Ilu, whose influence was so extensively felt in the West, even in Egypt, is the origin of the Erakian Anu. Moreover, we know for certainty that while Anu of Erech, or today's modern Iraq, later generally replaced Ilu, this fact was fully appreciated by later generations when they used Anu and Antu with the generic sense of God and Goddess. The reading Anu or An in the initial line of the Hammurabi Code is being very generally adopted, but it is a mistake. When Anu of Erech is referred to in the code, his name is written Anum or Num. Whereas the chief's deity name, the father of the gods, who together with Elil, as Hammurabi says, raised the towers of Babylon, is written Elu An. This clear-cut distinction must be recognized. Moreover, the present text containing Elu, as well as hundreds of personal names belonging to this early period, compounded with Elu, and other facts clearly show that the Western Semites, as well as the early Akkadians, used the word Elu, God, to represent the creator and supreme ruler. Naturally, this fully confirms the impression we get from the Old Testament that the Semites in the land called Amuru by the Babylonians, which included Aram, used the word Il-U or El-U to designate the Most High God, their El-Elyon. Okay, but according to the translator, Victor N. Alexander, it's Il, it's not El, because El is a pagan Canaanite god, right? El, E-I-L, is the real name of God, apparently, not El. Ancient fragment of the Eternal Legend. Through the discovery of dynastic lists and other historical data, the great antiquity of Babylonian civilization is now fully determined. We now have lists of rulers which carry us back to the 5th millennium BC. Instead of the earliest period known representing the beginning of civilization, there is every reason to believe that millenniums of history, not of savagery, but of civilized man, precede what we know as the earliest, and when systematic excavations are conducted in Central Asia, in Asia Minor and in Syria, we should have data whereby the gap between prehistoric man of millenniums ago and man of the earliest historic period will be considerably reduced. It is generally understood that in certain Aryan lands gods became men. Many scholars maintain that the same has occurred with the Semites. They have said that Nimrod, the patriarchs, and many other biblical characters were originally deities. That Etana, Lugal, Mada, Tammuz, Gilgamesh, and many other Babylonian rulers had also descended from the realms of mythology. Fortunately, clay tablets which are not so perishable as skins or papyrus have recently furnished us with the material whereby some of the so-called deities are restored to their places in dynastic lists, and whereby it is possible to assert that it cannot be proved that gods ever became mortals in the Semitic world. The order must be exactly reversed. While anthropomorphic ideas are attributed to the deities, we have no instances of a Semitic god becoming a man. This fragment of an old version of the Etana legend was written about 2,000 years earlier than the fragments found in the library of Ashurbanipal, 668 to 626 BC. It has also been previously published. He's got some footnote down here. A transliteration and translation on the basis of the same text was published by Jensen, KB, Volume 1, 1100 WF and 581 WF. See also Frank, Studies on Babylonian Religion, 105 WF. This fragment contains the opening and the closing lines of a large tablet which had 3 columns on the obverse and 3 on the reverse. It seems to the writer that the complete tablet must have contained about 275 lines. Among the fragments of the epic written in the Assyrian period, there is one which duplicates partially some lines of the present text. An outline of the legend, as we now know from the different fragments, follows. The deity had deserved the city, and in consequence anarchy and confusion prevailed, and productivity ceased. The sheep no longer bore young, lambs. Okay. The gods designed to bring the state to an end designated Ishtar to go to the rescue, and Etana was installed as king. About this time an eagle and a serpent formed an alliance to carry on the work of destruction. Each, accompanied by a brood, went to the mountain for prey. Each killed an animal and then shared them with their broods. Although warned not to do so by one of her offspring, the eagle pounced upon and devoured the young of the serpent. The serpent appealed to Shamash, the god of justice, and was advised to conceal herself in the carcass of a bull that they had slain, and when the eagle swooped down upon it, to seize and tear her to pieces. This was done, and the eagle was left to die in a hole in the mountain. The eagle in turn appealed to Shamash, promising eternal obedience if rescued. Daily, Etana also pleaded with Shamash to allow, or to show him the plant of birth, that fertility might be restored. The god told him to seek the hole in the mountain into which the eagle had been thrown, and there the plant would be shown him. Upon his arrival at the hole, the eagle appealed to Etana for help, promising in return to fly with him to the dwelling of the gods, probably with the idea of obtaining immortality. Etana mounted upon the back of the eagle, and together they reached the heaven of Anu. The eagle urged Etana to proceed to the dwelling of Ishtar, the planet Venus, but after a flight of 6 hours, either through exhaustion or the intervention of the goddess, a precipitous descent to the earth was made. The fragmentary character of the end of the legend leaves us in doubt whether or not it proved fatal. There can be little question but that many details of the legend are still wanting. It seems to be indicated by the art of the sewer cylinders depicting the ascent, and so forth. The early dynastic lists of Babylonia given in the appendix show that Etana, the shepherd, who lived in the 5th millennium BC, was an usurper and became the 12th ruler of the first dynasty of Kish, who ruled all lands. In the Omen text discussed below, he is called king. The name Etana is West Semitic, as are several of the first 5 rulers of the early Kish dynasty, which have been preserved. In this fragment of the early version, besides the god Anu, only the Anunnaki and the Sibutu are mentioned. In the late version, many other Semitic gods are referred to, some of whom may have been introduced in the later period. An interesting parallel to this is the adding of Ishtar's name as one of the gods of Inanna in the late redaction of the Gilgamesh epic, whereas in the early version the temple Inanna is the dwelling place of Anu alone. It is not possible that the eternal legend has an historical background, as in the case of the Lugal Mada, the Gilgamesh and other epics. As in the case of the so-called Zu bird, and it goes on about this bird and this eagle, the symbol of an invader of the following dynasty whose name was written in Gish Zida is Sumerian. In Sumerian was the serpent. The well-known goblet of Chaldea was the Caduceus, which in the later period was dedicated to this deified king. The bas relief depicting this demigod, who with heads of serpents protruding from his shoulders, is leading Chaldea, as well as the seal of this great patesi, clearly indicates that the serpent was the emblem of Nin Gish Zida, and so forth. The worship of the serpent is very general in Elam, Egypt, Phoenicia, Hatti, Persia, India, China and Greece. Whether in the early period it was so universal or whether for the ancient period additional information will show that it was merely local cannot be surmised. It would therefore seem precarious to say more than that Tammuz and his father seem to have been identified with the state, the emblem of which was probably the serpent, Siru, and so forth. The transliteration and translation of the ancient fragment of the Eternal epic follow, and it mentions the great Anunnaki who decided fate, sat down, took counsel concerning the land. A fragment of the Adapa legend. The third fragment contains a portion of the well-known Adapa legend, but unfortunately it has not been possible as yet to determine at that particular time in what period Adapa lived. What is known of the legend of Adapa is based upon several fragmentary tablets which at one time belonged to the library of Ashurbanipal, 668 to 626 BC, including the present text, which also had been published about 25 years ago. This text and its translations were originally published by Scale, 1898. The moon from a photograph offered several improved readings. Adapa, a semi-divine seer who was priest at the temple of Ur in Eridu, had been granted wisdom by his father, the god Ur, but not eternal life. One day, in exercising one of the functions of his office, namely fishing in the Persian Gulf, a sudden squall from the south upset his boat. Angered at this, he broke the wings of the south wind so that for several days it did not blow the cooling breezes of the sea over the land. In consequence, Adapa was summoned by the god Anu to appear before him in heaven. Thereupon his father Ea told him how to excite the sympathy of Gish Zida and Tammuz, two deified kings who stood at the portal of heaven. Being cautioned by his father not to partake of the food and the drink that would be set before him, he refused, but excess of caution was responsible for his not receiving the food and water of life, whereby eternal life would have been gained. Scholars have pointed out certain resemblances of the story to that of Adam in Genesis, and some even have contended that the Adapa legend is the origin of the Hebrew narrative. They point to the food of life as corresponding to the tree of life, that Adapa, like Adam, had gained knowledge that was regarded as an attribute of divinity, etc. However, it was through disobedience in order to become like God that Adam ate of the fruit, while Adapa failed to obtain eternal life, owing to his obedience to his father's counsel in not eating of it. Others have contended that Adapa and Adam are different forms of the same name, while others hold that the name Adapa is the same as Elaparos. Looking for a footnote down here. The name Adapa is frequently written Adapad for Elaparos, Adapa, See Zimmerman KAT 522. This is a West Semitic name and is equivalent to Alap Uru, perhaps ox of the god Uru. Im-me-ir-li, lamb of God. Aga-al Marduk, calf of Marduk. See Clay Empire of the Amorites, page 78. Others have contended that Adapa and Adama are different forms of the same name, while still others hold that the name of Adapa is the same as Alaparos, which name they changed to read Adaparos, the second of the antediluvian kings handed down by Berossus. The present writer is inclined to believe that Adapa was what the text informs us, namely a ruler, a sage, a man of Eridu, and that when excavations reveal the history of that city, we shall become familiar with the history of his reign, or his rule, when he will take his place with Etana, Gilgamesh, and others in the list of kings or patriarchs. Owing to the reference to the deified Gish-Siddha and Tammuz in the legend, although it does not necessarily follow, in view of additions made in the later redactions, the time Adapa lived may have been subsequent to the early Erech dynasty. Following is a transliteration and a translation of the fragment now in the Pierpont Morgan Library collection. An early chapter in the history of Amaru and Babylon. We now have considerable data for the reconstruction of a chapter in the history of Babylonia, and incidentally also that of Syria of a very early period, namely the second earliest known post-Diluvian dynasty, which began to rule about or prior to 4000 BC. Ungard makes the date of the beginning of the third known dynasty that of i.e. at 3927 BC. Malsana put it at about 3900 BC. Weidner 4148 BC. Legrain 4340 BC. So they all had their different ideas with dates. The so-called legend of the zoo bird found in the library of Ashurbanipal has been known for many years. It acquaints us with the fact that an enemy designated as Zu, the storm bird, had robbed Enlil of Nippur, etc., etc. We learned that Lugal Mada, a shepherd, came to the rescue of the land by some kind of strategy, succeeded in bringing back the tablets of destiny, and in restoring Enlil to his position. For this act he is in time credited with the title the Enlil of Kulab Lugal Mada, which was adopted as the name of a star. Kulab was part of Erech, and is doubtless where he erected his palace. It was to the distant mountain Sabu that Lugal Mada went in pursuit of Zu, and the story continues. Lugal Mada is credited with having ruled longer than any other of his dynasty. The fragment of an historical text recently published shows that he conquered Hauma, Aleppo, and Tidnum in the west, and it can be assumed that he ruled the west land. This would give sufficient reason why his name should have been preserved in the tradition of the west. Nimrod is the only name of a Babylonian ruler of the early period, prior to Amraphel, that is preserved in the Old Testament. Moreover, his own habitat, or that of his ancestors, may originally have been in that land. For his wife's name, although written in Sumerian, Nin, son, was Semitic, namely Rimat Belit, and her father bore the Amorite name Semak-ur, Semakoros, a name like the Old Testament Semak-yahu, Semachia. Ninsun, who became the mother of Gilgamesh, bears the title, etc., etc., translated by some scholars, the wild cow of the stall. Since the ideogram's son and her Sumerian name means Rimtu, beloved, etc., etc. Tammuz followed Lugal Mada as king of Erech. It would seem that Babylonia had suffered another upheaval when Nin-Gishzida, his father, had ravaged the land, which we learn from an omen. Besides this fact, the latter is known only as a deity with his habitat at Lagash. Doubtless he had been king of that city. Tammuz was not originally the personification of the son of the springtime, or even the personification of some kind of wood, as has been said, but as the new dynastic list shows, he was a human being and the fourth king of this early Erech dynasty. In Babylonia, the legends and hymns concerning Tammuz and Ishtar are exceedingly numerous. Here they are identified especially with the city of Erech, where he ruled. From the many inscriptions relating to the cult, we learn that in the fourth month, which was named Tammuz, at the time vegetation began to decay, the woman mourned his death. From the cult tablets, also certain facts are ascertained which enable us to know something about his family connections. The Cuneiform inscriptions inform us that the mother of Tammuz was named Zertu, which name is also written Sirdu. Certainly, Zertu seems to be Semitic. The name Tammuz was reproduced by two Sumerian words or ideograms, which represented the pronunciation, namely Dumuzi, meaning faithful son. But this is no proof that Tammuz was a Sumerian. In fact, this meaning of the ideograms speaks against the possibility of his being a Sumerian. Faithful son would not be appropriate for a personal name, but rather as an epithet. His father's name, Nin-Gishzida, is also in a Sumerian dress, but this very probably also represents a Semitic name. This suggestion is based on the connection of his son Tammuz with the West and on the name of his wife Zertu. The chief seat of the cult of Ashurta, the Ashtaroth of the Old Testament, or Ishtar, in Babylonia was at Erech, but Halab seems to have been her home. In one of these Babylonian lamentation hymns, we have this passage: the queen of Erech for a husband, the queen of Halab for a husband wails. She cries for him, right? This and many other couplets referring to Ishtar or to Tammuz and Ishtar show that these two cities were intimately identified with each other. One of the earliest religious texts at present known tells us that this goddess had a shrine at Nippur and that she was from the land of Harab. In the Gilgamesh epic, when she proposes to Gilgamesh, king of Erech, she says, "Come, Gilgamesh, be thou my spouse. Present me with thy offspring, but thou be my husband. Let me be thy wife, and I will set thee in a chariot," etc. Into our house under the fragrance of the cedar tree, enter, etc., etc. And there's more about her. There is a fable that has been handed down by alien that ought, it's not an alien, it's alien, that ought not to be lost sight of in this connection. From it we gather that Gilgamesh was born in secret and was thrown from the Acropolis where his mother was imprisoned, and that in his fall an eagle caught him and carried him to a garden. His keeper reared him, or brought him up. We are led in this connection to inquire what is the significance of the legend. Why is the eagle here introduced? Has it anything to do with the power represented by the eagle in the Eternal legend, and perhaps also with the zoo bird in the Lugal Mara epic? As we have seen, Tammuz and his father were identified, and down here it has his footnote. The fable of Aelian, De Natura Animalium 12:21, reads as follows: it is characteristic of animals also to love human beings. For example, an eagle brought up a baby. I wish to tell the whole story that it may bear witness to my statement. When Sumakeros reigned over the Babylonians, the Chaldeans said that the son of his daughter would take the kingdom away from the grandfather. He was alarmed at this, and if I may speak somewhat jocularly, he became an Acrisius to the girl, for he guarded her very strenuously. But without his knowledge, for fate was stronger than the Babylonian, the girl who made a mother by a man of low degree and bore a child. The girl was made a mother by a man of low degree and bore a child. Her guards, in fear of the king, threw it from the Acropolis, for it was there that the aforesaid girl was imprisoned. Well, an eagle very quickly saw the child's fall, and before it was dashed upon the earth, got underneath it and received it upon its back. Taking it to a garden, he set it down very cautiously. The caretaker of the place, seeing the pretty child, was fond of it and reared it, and brought it up, raised it. It was called Gilgamesh, and reigned over the Babylonians. If anybody thinks this is a fable, I admit that on testing it, I thought lightly of its validity myself. But I am told that Achaemenes, the Persian from whom the Persian nobility descends, was an eagle's nursling, translated from the Greek by Professor A.M. Harmon. Okay, and goes more into that. And it's more about that story, and he comes up with some information on Atrahasis. An early version of the Atrahasis epic. Translation from the Sumerian into English, and then an explanation here. The Deluge story in the Gilgamesh epic in English, and an explanation here. George Smith published the first translation in the Chaldean account of Genesis, which we've done a video on it. We can put that as the end screen for you to have a look at. The text is published in such a book. Translations have been published also by Fox Talbot and so forth. For comparative purposes, the following four are freely quoted in discussions and notes. Yes, this George Smith was quite a translator. I think he helped Henry Layard with the tablets that they found in the Ashurbanipal library when they came across it, discovered it, and dug it up and shipped the 50,000 or so tablets to the British Museum in England. He played a major part in that. Berosus's version of the Atrahasic epic. After the death of Adatos, his son Xisuthros reigned for 18 SARS. In his reign, a great deluge or flood took place, and story has been recorded as follows. Kronos appeared to him in his sleep and said that on the 15th of the month, Dicios, men would be destroyed by a deluge or flood. He bade him, therefore, setting down and writing the beginning, middle, and end of all things, to bury them in Sippara, the city of the sun, to build a boat and go aboard it with his family and close friends, to stow in it food and drink, to put in it also living creatures, winged and four-footed, and when all his preparations were complete, to set sail. When asked where he was sailing, to say, to the gods, in order to pray that men may have blessings. He did not disobey, but built the boat 5 furlongs long. Need some explanation there. Dynastic list of early Babylonia. So maybe these are the kings that ruled those different dynasties. Here's some fragments. Early version of the Atrahasic epic, a Hebrew deluge story in cuneiform of verse. So that's probably the front. Here's a reverse, probably the back of it. And so forth. The Eternal Legend, ancient version of the Eternal Legend. The Adapa Legend of verse in the cuneiform. And here's the obverse, probably the back. There's the front or the back. And here's the Hebrew deluge story in cuneiform, reverse. The Adapa Legend reverse is destroyed. Size of the originals. Ancient version of the Eternal Legend, size of original. Doesn't actually give you the measurements. And perhaps that's the end of the book. Yep. Okay, so we hope that this video has opened your eyes to the realization that these Sumerian myths, Akkadian myths, etc., by this writer, researcher, have been disproved as the actual originals, as we all thought, that really it's all Hebraic. All the wording is originally found in the Hebrew, the language of the A-wer. The people who, well, they're basically the relations, the forefathers of Abraham prior to when he was born. A-wer in the ancient Aramaic, the term Asher, translated the Lishon Articus of Prayer, translated into English, details that these people, Japheth the son of Noah, his descendants, and there's a long lineage there, I think it's Genesis 10, something like that. This lineage details Japheth as the son of Noah and then his descendants, and it goes all the way down to Arpachshad, who Japheth was considered the forefather of the Hebrews, and then one of his descendants had a son called Arpachshad, and then he had a son called Eber, or E-wer, and then he is like this head or leader of these peoples, the A-wer, who did a journey, who made a journey, they crossed over, they went to another land, the land that was promised by Abraham, by God, the land of milk and honey, or plenty, or abundance, but he gets as far as Haran, and his father's brother dies, Terah, so either his father or his uncle dies. So he's there for a while, and then later on he continues that journey and goes to Canaan with his people, and then they live there. Canaan then becoming today's Israel. Well, today's Israel is actually the state of Israel that was granted them by the British, because the certain Herzl, a Jew, made a deal with the British, who were about to surrender to the Germans in World War One. They felt, well, we're losing hardcore, so we might sign a treaty with Germany, a surrender to Germany. But this guy said, if I provide you the solution to come out victorious, to defeat the Germans, will you grant me my wish? He says, depends on what it is. And he said, well, I want a state. We want a state in Israel created for the Jews, so all the Jews can go back to it. Okay, so this guy said, yeah, we guarantee that. Usually the British renege on their deals, but this guy, well, these people kept their promise, right? It was supposed to be established like after the war. He asked in 1917, and then obviously after the war it should have been established, right? But it didn't happen until like 1947 or 48. Apparently Winston Churchill was pushing for it, and then the British provided it, something like that. And then they had the Israel-Palestine war because the Arabs got upset because they were encroaching on Palestine, all this sort of stuff. So this guy said, this British person said, yeah, okay, we'll do that deal. What's your want? He says, we want the state, right? So he says, what's the secret then? To us overcoming the Germans, beating the Germans. He says, bring in the Americans, because they were a powerful, mighty force, right? Very, very strong, military-wise. So this guy did that, and they beat Germany. Okay, then Germany suffered reparations and all this sort of stuff for the war, which basically near crippled them, right? Economy-wise, etc., etc. So eventually, this Israel was given the state of Israel, where all the Jews from around the world, from the diaspora, went there and lived there to this day. Yeah. So Hebrews originally were named in the Aramaic, or called in the Aramaic, A-wer. We have that confirmed by a comment made to us by a practicing Jew. He knows the language, etc. He said, yeah, that's right. That's the same word in Hebrew, which means cross over or make a journey or make a passage. Okay, so we hope that this video we've uploaded for you has opened your eyes to that fact that the Sumerian, the Akkadian, all those cuneiform tablets, scripts, etc. were actually originally in that Hebrew language. So if you liked it, something new to you, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that, or thought it was Sumerian and Akkadian as we did, then give us a like, subscribe to our channel, put your comments in the comment section below, and then go share this video with all those that you know who may have also thought, these Sumerian tablets were Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian. Wow, it was actually Hebrew? Wow, we never knew that. Thank you for bringing that to us.